again. In this next video, in this 5-minute fundamentals mini-series, we're going to talk about one of the most widely misused and misunderstood parts of the capital stack called mezzanine financing. This is an important part of the capital structure as it allows you or your borrowers or investors the ability to close the gap on the funds they need between the loan, the debt, and the acquisition price. Now in this video I will also demystify the concept of a second mortgage in commercial real estate, so you'll want to pay close attention to this video and perhaps watch it several times over and over again. In this business, the paydays are big, but it's all about what we call the intellectual capital. So you have to be able to structure these deals for everybody's benefit. Once you have that, then the money will certainly follow. Let's get started. Welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of our installment talking about commercial real estate capital structure. These are the things that you need to know about. All right, in the first video we talked about senior debt, senior loans, the first trusted lender. We talked about the remedies that they had, but we came across a little problem. Is that, well, if the conduit lenders or if a life company or some lender is coming up only at 65% and you want to buy a piece of property for $1 million, what are you going to do? Well, you'd have to come to the table with a 45% down payment. Now, do you really think that that happens in the world of commercial real estate? Well, depending on the capital markets and how they work, yes and no. So what we have here is we're going to talk about the next step up in what we call the waterfall, which is the mezzanine piece, the mezzanine financing layer. And this is something that a lot of people love to talk about, but a lot of them don't have any idea what it actually means. Mezzanine is basically providing closing the gap, the financing to close the gap for you to acquire a piece of real estate. And that's usually done with another lender who is not a life company, but usually more of an opportunistic lender. And this is important here. One thing though that we talk about before we get into what we're talking about here with the remedies and the preference of payments is that I have to remind you that these entities, these properties are held in entities called special purpose entities. And this is something we probably all know about, but there's not a single commercial lender out there that is not going to want to offer a loan to a property that's not going to be held in a special purpose entity. Today that entity du jour is the limited liability company, and so we talk about that, and the reason why we do that is because it has to do with the remedies for a lot of these financial products, these structured products and the capital structure that are being offered today. Let's talk about a couple things here before we go any further. Attributes. Mezzanine financing, what it does is it fills in the gap. A lot of mezzanine lenders, depending on the markets, will go up to 80, 85%. I've actually seen them go as high as 90 during the really strong market. Regardless of what you might have heard, we're going to talk about second mortgages. Second mortgages is usually a myth. And the reason for that is because sometimes in the eyes of a bankruptcy court, should there be some problems, the bankruptcy judge will see both the first and the second lenders as being both equal secured lenders. So the last thing that a secured lender wants to see is another secured lender there who they might have to share the beans with later on due to the fact of a judge making a motion to say, hey, both of these guys are split even Steven. So you've seen some interesting things happen in bankruptcy court, and that's really why a lot of these products came into being, is because they always structure with what can happen in the worst case scenario first and then back into it. As far as the collateral, people are wondering what the collateral is. It's not a second mortgage, so you're unsecured. It's secured by the assignment of partnership interests. What is that? Basically, that means that the mezzanine lender can step into the shoes of the borrower and take control of the entire asset by taking control of the LLC. They become the general partner or the managing member of the project itself, and they're able to remedy the situation that way by replacing management. Preference of payment, well, of course, first time the floodwaters come in, the senior loan is going to be paid first, and then the mezzanine will be paid second. Okay, you don't want to pay, if you don't pay the first loan first, guess what happens? He can enforce foreclosure, he can foreclose. So it goes senior loan, then mezzanine. Remedies, this is very important here. So what happens if something goes wrong and the mezz lender has to protect itself? What are the remedies for a mezzanine financing piece? Very simple, there's one of two ways. And these ways are explained in what's called the intercreditor agreement. In the intercreditor agreement, and usually that the mezzanine is originated at the same time as the senior debt, as the first trust deed, usually what will happen is that there is something called, in the intercreditor agreement, the preference of repayment. Now, a lot of these mezzanine loans are opportunistic lenders. They're not huge gargantuan companies like MetLife. They're not life companies. They're not huge Wall Street investment banks, although some of them are. What happens is that you have to put the language into the writing, and the intercreditor agreement is sort of like a prenuptial agreement, meaning what happens when things go bad. And there's two ways to do it. They can either pay off the entire senior loan, and that's very, very cost prohibitive to do. So figure if this guy he doesn't have the deep pockets to pay off MetLife over here, you're going to have some problems, so that might not be able to happen. The second remedy over here would be to assume the senior loan and just make payments on the senior loan on the first trust deed. Sort of like for you real estate investors in residential, if you're familiar with subject to, it's the same thing, only you're taking title over, so to speak, in the name of the LLC. So that concludes the basics of mezzanine financing, and we're going to continue in this series now where we're talking about capital structure, and the next one up the totem pole, that's going to be preferred equity.